The October wind cut through Jake Morrison's weathered coat like a blade as he rode toward his ranch, the setting sun painting the Arizona desert in shades of copper and gold. 15 years of solitary living had taught him to read the land's moods, and tonight something felt wrong. His cattle were restless, bunched together near the creek instead of scattered across the pasture where he'd left them that morning. Jake dismounted near the barn, his boots crunching on frost-brittle grass. At 52, his movements carried the careful precision of a man who'd learned that carelessness meant death. The Civil War had stolen his youth, and the frontier had claimed everything else: his wife, his dreams, his faith in humanity. All that remained was this patch of hard-scrabble land and the bitter satisfaction of surviving another day. The barn door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the evening breeze. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the colt at his hip. He'd secured that door himself before riding out to check the fence line. Someone had been here. "Easy, boy," he murmured to his horse Thunder, whose ears were pinned back in warning. The stallion sensed danger, too. Jake pushed the barn door open with his boot, rifle ready. Moonlight streamed through gaps in the weathered planks, casting long shadows across hay bales and farm equipment. The air smelled of horses, leather, and something else, something metallic and sharp: blood. A soft whimper came from behind the grain barrels. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger as he approached, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. Rustlers and Apache raiders were common enough, but they didn't usually hide in barns like wounded animals. What he found made him freeze. Huddled behind the barrels was a child, a girl, no more than 12, with long black hair matted with dirt and blood. Her torn dress revealed she was Apache, but that wasn't what stopped Jake's breath. It was her eyes, dark pools of terror and pain that reminded him of his own daughter, Sarah, lost to fever 10 years ago. The girl clutched a makeshift bandage to her shoulder, blood seeping between her small fingers. She looked up at Jake with the desperate wariness of a cornered animal, too weak to run but ready to fight. "Please," she whispered in English, the word barely audible. Don't let them find me." Jake lowered his rifle slowly, his mind racing. Finding an Apache child on his property was dangerous enough, but harboring one was tantamount to treason in the eyes of most white settlers. The territorial government had made it clear: Apache meant enemy, regardless of age. But looking at this broken, bleeding child, Jake saw only what she was: a little girl who needed help. "Who's after you?" he asked quietly, holstering his weapon. "Men with badges," she managed, her voice growing weaker. They killed my family. Said we were off the reservation illegally." Jake's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about bounty hunters operating outside the law, claiming Apache scalps for territorial bounties, regardless of whether their victims were actually hostile. It was a brutal business that turned human lives into currency. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both freeze. Through the barn's gaps, Jake saw torches flickering in the distance, at least 6 riders heading straight for his ranch. "Stay quiet," he whispered to the girl, then stepped outside to meet the approaching men. Sheriff Tom Bradley led the group, his badge glinting in the torchlight. Behind him rode Deputy Mills and 4 men Jake didn't recognize, hard-faced strangers with the look of professional killers. "Evening, Jake," Bradley called out, reining in his horse. "We're tracking some Apache raiders who hit a wagon train this morning. You seen anything unusual?" Jake kept his expression neutral. "Just got back from checking fence line. Been quiet out here." One of the strangers, a lean man with pale eyes and a cavalry saber scar across his cheek, urged his horse forward. "Name's Garrett. We tracked the savages this far before losing the trail. Mind if we search your property?" "I do mind," Jake replied evenly. "This is private land." Garrett's hand moved to his gun. "We got territorial authority to pursue hostiles wherever they run. That include your barn, old man." The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Jake stood his ground, knowing that the wounded girl was mere yards away, bleeding and helpless. One word from him could save his own skin, but it would doom a child who'd already lost everything. "Search warrant?" Jake asked. Sheriff Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Jake, don't make this harder than it needs to be. These men are doing legitimate bounty work under territorial law. Then they can come back with paper," Jake said firmly. "Until then, they can get off my land." Garrett's lips curled into a cold smile. "You protecting savages now, Morrison? That'd make you a traitor to your own kind." The word hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Jake had been called many things in his life, but never that. Yet as he stood there protecting a child he barely knew, he realized he didn't care what they called him. "Get off my land. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the desert sage. Then Garrett spat into the dirt and pulled his horse around. "We'll be back, Morrison, and when we find what we're looking for, you'll answer for it." As the riders disappeared into the darkness, Jake knew his quiet life was over. He'd crossed a line tonight, and there would be consequences. But when he returned to the barn and saw the Apache girl's grateful, trusting eyes, he knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. The question now was whether he'd live long enough to see it through. Dawn broke cold and grey over the Morrison ranch, casting long shadows across the yard where Jake had spent a sleepless night keeping watch. The Apache girl, she'd whispered her name was Aiyana, had developed a fever during the night, and her shoulder wound showed signs of infection despite his crude attempts at doctoring. Jake had carried her into his cabin before first light, knowing that keeping her in the barn was no longer safe. She lay now on his own bed, small and fragile against the rough wool blankets, her breathing shallow and labored. In the pale morning light, she looked even younger than 12, her face gaunt with hunger and trauma. "Water," she whispered, her lips cracked and dry. Jake helped her sit up, supporting her slight weight as she drank from a tin cup. Her fever had broken sometime near dawn, leaving her weak but lucid. As she drank, her dark eyes studied him with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why help me?" The question caught Jake off guard. He'd been asking himself the same thing since the moment he'd decided to face down Garrett and his men. The honest answer was complicated, wrapped up in memories of his own daughter, his growing disgust with the brutality he'd witnessed on the frontier, and something deeper he couldn't quite name. "Because it's right," he said finally, though the words felt inadequate. Aiyana nodded slowly, as if this explanation made perfect sense to her. "My grandmother taught me that sometimes the Great Spirit sends help in unexpected forms. She said white men had no honor, but—" She trailed off, studying his weathered face. "You have honor." Jake felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. "Your grandmother was mostly right about white men. Don't trust too easily, girl." "Aiyana," she corrected gently. "My name means eternal blossom in my language." "Pretty name," Jake said, then immediately felt foolish for the observation. He cleared his throat. "That shoulder needs proper doctoring, infections setting in." "I know healing plants," Aiyana offered. "My mother taught me. There are some that grow near water if you could—" "No," Jake's voice was firm. "You can't leave this cabin, not yet. Those men are still hunting you and they're not giving up easy." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching riders echoed across the valley. Jake moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. 3 riders this time. Sheriff Bradley, Deputy Mills, and a stranger in a black coat, who carried himself with the bearing of a man accustomed to authority. "Stay quiet and stay hidden," Jake told Aiyana, helping her settle back into the bed. He pulled the blankets up to her chin and positioned himself to block any view of the bed from the door. The knock came hard and official. Jake opened the door to find Sheriff Bradley looking uncomfortable, flanked by his deputy and the stranger. "Morning, Jake," Bradley said. "This here's Judge Hawthorne from Tucson. He's got some questions for you." Judge Hawthorne was a tall, thin man with steel-gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they saw. His black coat was dusty from travel, but his manner was crisp and authoritative. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said without preamble, "I understand you had visitors last night, bounty hunters working under territorial authority." "Men came by," Jake admitted carefully. "Didn't much like their manners." "Their manners aren't the issue," Hawthorne replied. "The issue is that you interfered with a lawful pursuit of hostile Apache raiders. That's a serious offense." Jake crossed his arms. "Didn't see any warrants. Didn't see any proof they were lawful anything. The territorial government has authorized all necessary measures to deal with the Apache problem," Hawthorne said, his voice carrying the weight of official pronouncement. "That includes pursuit onto private property when in hot pursuit of hostiles." "And it includes shooting children?" Jake asked quietly. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. "What children?" Jake realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late to take back the words. Behind him he heard the faint rustle of bedclothes as Aiyana shifted, probably trying to hear better. "Heard tell these raiders included women and children," Jake said, trying to recover. "Doesn't sit right with me hunting kids." "Apache children grow up to be Apache warriors," Hawthorne said coldly. "The territorial government has learned that sentiment is a luxury we can't afford. Now, I'm going to ask you directly, Mr. Morrison. Are you harboring any Apache fugitives?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gallows. Jake felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Behind him, a child who'd lost everything waited for his answer. In front of him, the full weight of territorial law demanded her surrender. "No," Jake said steadily. "I'm not harboring any fugitives." It wasn't exactly a lie. Aiyana wasn't a fugitive. She was a victim. But Jake knew that distinction wouldn't matter to men like Hawthorne. The judge studied him for a long moment. "I hope that's true, Mr. Morrison, because if I find out you're lying, I'll see you hanged for treason." The territorial government takes a dim view of whites who aid and comfort the enemy. Is that a threat, Judge? "It's a promise," Hawthorne replied. "Good day, gentlemen." As the three men rode away, Jake closed the door and leaned against it, feeling suddenly exhausted. When he turned around, Aiyana was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. "They will kill you for helping me," she said softly. "I should go." "You're not going anywhere," Jake said firmly. "Not until you're healed, and not until I figure out how to keep you safe." "But your life—" "My life's been borrowed time for years," Jake interrupted. "Lost my wife to cholera, my daughter to fever, my faith to war. Maybe it's time I did something worth the cost." Aiyana studied him with those dark, wise eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "In my tribe, when someone saves your life, you become part of their family. You become responsible for each other." Jake felt that uncomfortable tightness in his chest again. "Is that what you want? To be part of my family?" "I have no family left," she said simply. "But if you will have me, I would be honored to call you father." The word hit Jake like a physical blow. He hadn't been called father since Sarah died, and he'd never expected to hear it again. But looking at this brave, broken child who'd already lost everything, he realized that maybe they could save each other. "Then I guess that makes you my daughter," he said quietly. "And I don't abandon family." Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising rain and trouble in equal measure. But inside the cabin, something precious and fragile had taken root. The beginning of a family forged not by blood, but by choice and courage in the face of a hostile world. 3 days later, Jake knew he couldn't put off the trip to Copper Ridge any longer. Aiyana's shoulder was healing, but they were running low on supplies and he needed to gauge the town's mood. More importantly, he had to speak with Martha Kellerman, the town's school teacher, and the only person who might help him navigate the legal maze of adopting an Apache child. "I don't like leaving you alone," Jake said, adjusting the ammunition belt around his waist. Aiyana sat at his kitchen table, color finally returning to her cheeks after days of rest and proper food. "I will be safe," she assured him, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "I know how to hide. If anyone comes, anyone at all, you get to the root cellar and stay there until I return. Understand?" She nodded solemnly. Over the past few days, she'd proven herself remarkably resilient and mature for her age. She'd shared stories of her life with the Chiricahua Apache, her family's seasonal migrations, and the increasing pressure from the U.S. Army that had driven her people to desperation. In return, Jake had told her about his late wife Anna and daughter Sarah, finding it easier to speak of them than he had in years. The ride to Copper Ridge took an hour through desert scrubland, dotted with saguaro cacti and ocotillo. The town squatted in a natural basin, its adobe buildings and wooden storefronts weathered by sun and wind. It had grown up around a copper mine that played out 5 years ago, leaving behind a community of ranchers, merchants and drifters trying to scratch out a living in unforgiving country. Jake's arrival at the general store drew immediate attention. Conversations stopped as he dismounted, and he felt the weight of hostile stares from the men gathered outside Murphy's saloon. Word had traveled fast about his confrontation with the bounty hunters. Inside Kellerman's general store, Martha looked up from her ledger with worried eyes. At 45, she was a handsome woman with graying brown hair and the calloused hands of someone who worked hard for every dollar. She'd been widowed 3 years ago when her husband died in a mining accident, leaving her to run the store and teach the town's children. "Jake," she said quietly, glancing toward the window where several men were still watching. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Martha," Jake touched the brim of his hat respectfully, "need to place an order for supplies." She nodded and moved behind the counter, but her expression remained troubled. "Jake, there's talk in town. Ugly talk. They're saying you're harboring Apache fugitives." "And what do you think, Martha?" She studied his face carefully. Martha Kellerman was one of the few people in Copper Ridge who'd known Jake before tragedy had made him a hermit. She'd been Anna's friend, had taught Sarah to read before the fever took her. "I think you're not the kind of man to harbor killers," she said finally. "But I also think you're exactly the kind of man who'd help a child in trouble, regardless of the consequences." Jake felt a moment of relief. Martha had always been perceptive, and her good opinion still mattered to him. "Hypothetically," he said carefully, "if someone wanted to legally adopt an Apache child, how would they go about it?" Martha's eyes widened slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "Hypothetically, it would be nearly impossible. Territorial law requires Apache children to be placed in government schools or returned to designated reservations. Private adoption by whites is discouraged." "What about through the church or territorial courts?" "Jake," Martha said, leaning forward, "even if you found a sympathetic judge, the community would never accept it. You'd be putting yourself and the child in constant danger." Before Jake could respond, the store's bell jangled violently as the door slammed open. 5 men entered, led by Walter Hayes, a prominent rancher who'd lost cattle to Apache raids the previous spring. Behind him came Garrett, the scarred bounty hunter from 3 nights ago, along with 3 other hard-looking men. "Well, well," Hayes drawled, his voice carrying the lazy menace of a man accustomed to getting his way. "If it isn't our local Apache sympathizer." "Walter," Martha said sharply, "this is a place of business, not a saloon. Keep your voices civil." Hayes ignored her, focusing on Jake with cold blue eyes. "Morrison, you've got something that belongs to us." "I don't have anything that belongs to you," Jake replied evenly, though his hand rested casually near his gun. Garrett stepped forward, his pale eyes glittering with malice. "We tracked that Apache girl to your ranch 3 nights ago, lost the trail there, but we know she didn't just vanish into thin air. Maybe she doubled back," Jake suggested. "Apache are clever that way." "Cut the act, old man," Garrett snarled. "We know you're hiding her. Question is, are you going to hand her over easy, or do we have to come take her?" The tension in the store was thick enough to cut with a knife. Martha had gone pale, but stood her ground behind the counter. Jake felt the familiar calm that always settled over him before violence, the same deadly stillness that had kept him alive through 4 years of war. "You're welcome to try," Jake said quietly. Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. 5 against 1, Morrison. "You were a soldier once, but that was a long time ago. Some things you don't forget." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, until Martha suddenly slammed her hand down on the counter, making everyone jump. "Enough," she snapped. "Walter Hayes, you get these hired killers out of my store right now, or I'll have Sheriff Bradley arrest the lot of you for disturbing the peace." "Bradley won't touch us," Hayes said confidently. "We're operating under territorial authority." "Are you?" Martha asked, pulling a telegram from beneath her counter. "Because I received this wire from Tucson this morning. Seems the territorial government is launching an investigation into unauthorized bounty operations. Apparently, some hunters have been claiming Apache scalps from peaceful families, causing quite a diplomatic problem with the reservation authorities." Garrett's face went white, then flushed red with anger. "That's temporary bureaucratic nonsense." "Our contracts are valid." "Maybe," Martha said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But until the investigation is complete, I'd say your authority is questionable." Hayes glared at her, then at Jake. "This isn't over, Morrison. That girl is a killer, and anyone who protects her is a traitor to their own kind." "Then I guess you'll have to prove she's a killer first," Jake said calmly. After the men left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, Martha slumped against the counter. "That telegram was 3 days old," she admitted, "about a mining dispute in Tombstone, but they didn't need to know that." Jake felt a surge of gratitude and something deeper, the first stirring of hope he'd felt in years. "Martha, why are you helping me?" She looked up at him with tired but determined eyes. "Because 15 years ago you helped me when my husband was drinking away our savings, and I had nowhere to turn. Because you're one of the few decent men left in this godforsaken territory. And because—" She paused, then continued quietly. "Because if Anna were alive, she'd be doing the same thing." As Jake loaded his supplies and prepared for the ride home, he knew the battle lines had been drawn. Hayes and Garrett wouldn't give up easily, and the town was dividing into camps. Those who saw him as a traitor, and a precious few who still believed in doing what was right, regardless of the cost. But for the first time since he'd found Aiyana bleeding in his barn, Jake felt like he wasn't fighting alone. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see them through the storm that was coming. Jake knew trouble was coming the moment he crested the ridge overlooking his ranch. Smoke was rising from his cabin's chimney, smoke he hadn't left burning when he departed for town that morning. His blood turned to ice as he spurred thunder into a gallop, Winchester rifle already in his hands. The cabin door hung open, banging gently in the afternoon wind. Jake dismounted at a run, his heart hammering as he searched for signs of Aiyana. The interior had been ransacked, furniture overturned, supplies scattered, but no blood. More importantly, no body. "Aiyana!" he called out, but only silence answered. A soft thud from beneath the floorboards made him freeze. The root cellar. Jake pulled up the hidden trapdoor to find Aiyana huddled in the darkness below, clutching his old army bayonet in her small hands. "Papa Jake," she whispered, using the name she'd begun calling him. The word still caught him off guard every time, filling him with fierce protectiveness. "It's me, little one. You're safe." He helped her up, noting the tear tracks on her dirt-smudged cheeks. "What happened?" "3 men came," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "I heard them talking outside, so I hid like you taught me. They searched everywhere, broke many things. One of them said they would wait for you to return." Jake's jaw tightened. "Where are they now?" "Gone, but not far. I heard one say they would watch from the rocks above the creek. They think you will lead them to me when you return." Smart girl. Jake felt a surge of pride at her quick thinking, followed immediately by cold rage at the men who'd terrified his daughter, because that's what she was now, he realized, his daughter in every way that mattered. "We can't stay here," he said, already moving to gather essential supplies. "They'll be back with more men, and next time they won't leave empty-handed." "Where will we go?" Jake paused, considering their options. The territorial authorities wanted Aiyana returned to a reservation or government school. The bounty hunters wanted her dead. The townspeople saw her as a threat to their safety. But there was one place that might offer sanctuary, if he could reach it. "There's an old mining camp up in the Dragoon Mountains," he said, stuffing ammunition and dried food into saddlebags. "Abandoned for years, but the caves go deep. We can hide there while I figure out our next move." As they prepared to leave, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley. Too many horses. Jake peered out the window to see at least a dozen riders surrounding his ranch, led by Walter Hayes and Judge Hawthorne. Among them were Garrett and his bounty hunters, several townspeople Jake recognized, and a handful of territorial militia in blue uniforms. "Jake Morrison," Hayes called out. "We know you're in there, and we know you're harboring a hostile Apache. Come out with your hands up and surrender the girl." Jake felt Aiyana press close against his side, her small body trembling. "I won't let them take you," he promised quietly. "Not while there's breath in my body." "Jake!" This time it was Judge Hawthorne's voice carrying official authority. "You're surrounded and outnumbered. There's no need for bloodshed. Simply turn over the Apache child and submit to arrest. You'll get a fair trial." A fair trial. Jake almost laughed at the bitter irony. In a territory where Apache children were routinely shipped off to distant boarding schools to have their culture beaten out of them, where bounty hunters collected government money for Apache scalps, there would be nothing fair about any trial. "What's your answer, Morrison?" Hayes shouted. Jake looked down at Aiyana, seeing his own determination reflected in her dark eyes. She'd already lost one family to men like these. He'd be damned if he'd let her lose another. "My answer is no," Jake called back. "The girl stays with me." "Then you've chosen treason over duty," Hawthorne replied coldly. "Men, prepare to take the cabin by force." Jake grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. "Aiyana, get back to the root cellar. Whatever happens, stay hidden until—" "No." Her voice was small but firm. "We are family now. I will not hide while you fight alone." Before Jake could argue, gunfire erupted outside. But it wasn't aimed at the cabin. It came from the ridge overlooking the ranch from multiple positions. The posse's horses reared and screamed as bullets whistled around them, and several men dove for cover behind Jake's water trough and barn. Through the chaos, Jake saw something that made his blood run cold. Apache warriors were positioned along the ridgeline, at least 20 of them, their rifles trained on the posse below. At their head rode a tall, imposing figure Jake recognized from wanted posters, Nietzsche, one of the last free Apache war chiefs. "Aiyana," the war chief called out in English, his voice carrying clearly across the valley. "You will come with us now. It is time to return to your people." Jake felt Aiyana stiffen beside him. "My uncle," she whispered. "My mother's brother. He must have been tracking me." The situation had just become infinitely more complex. Jake was no longer facing just territorial authorities and bounty hunters. He was caught in the middle of a standoff between the U.S. government and one of the most feared Apache leaders still at large. "Nietzsche," Judge Hawthorne called out, trying to maintain some semblance of official authority, despite being outgunned and surrounded. "You're on U.S. territory illegally. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The Apache chief's laughter was cold as winter wind. White man's law means nothing here. The girl comes with us. She's not going anywhere, Jake shouted, surprising everyone, including himself. He stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand, facing down both forces simultaneously. Aiyana is my daughter now, under my protection. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the horses seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Jake stood alone between two armies, protecting a child who belonged to neither world, but had somehow become the center of both. You would die for an Apache child? Nietzsche asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I would die for my daughter, Jake replied firmly. Nietzsche studied him for a long moment, then looked toward the cabin where Aiyana had appeared in the doorway despite Jake's orders to stay hidden. Uncle, she called out in Apache, then switched to English so everyone could understand. This man saved my life when your warriors could not. He has shown me kindness when his own people call him traitor. He is my family now. The war chief's weathered face showed a flicker of something. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow warrior. And if I command you to return to your people? Aiyana lifted her chin with a dignity that belied her young years. Then I will go, but my heart will remain here, with the man who chose to be my father. Nietzsche nodded slowly as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. He raised his rifle, and for a moment Jake thought his life was over. Instead, the Apache chief fired a single shot into the air. A signal. My warriors and I came to rescue my sister's daughter, Nietzsche announced to the assembled posse, but I see she has already been rescued by a man of honor. We will not take her against her will. Now wait just a minute, Hayes protested. You can't just ride in here and... Nietzsche's cold stare silenced him. White man, you hunt children for money. You have no honor to speak of duty. He looked back at Jake. But you, rancher, you have proven yourself worthy of respect. The girl may stay with you, but know this. She is still Chiricahua Apache. If harm comes to her, we will know, and we will come. With that warning hanging in the air like smoke, Nietzsche and his warriors melted back into the mountains as silently as they had appeared, leaving the posse stunned and uncertain. Judge Hawthorne was the first to recover. This changes nothing, Morrison. You're still under arrest for harboring a fugitive. But the fight had gone out of most of the men. Facing down Apache warriors had reminded them that there were worse fates than dealing with one stubborn rancher and his adopted daughter. Several of the townspeople were already mounting up to leave. Judge, Sheriff Bradley said quietly, maybe we should reconsider. The Apache could have taken the girl by force, but they didn't. Maybe there's more to this situation than we thought. Jake saw his chance and took it. Aiyana's not a fugitive, he called out. She's a victim. Those bounty hunters killed her family illegally, and she came to me for protection. I'm willing to go through proper legal channels to adopt her, but I won't hand her over to men who hunt children for money. Martha Kellerman had arrived during the standoff, and now she stepped forward from the crowd. Jake's right. This child needs a home, not a reservation school or a grave. We should be ashamed of ourselves for terrorizing them. For a moment, the balance hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Then Judge Hawthorne lowered his weapon with obvious reluctance. This isn't over, Morrison, he said. I'll be watching you both. One mistake, one hint of trouble, and you'll both pay the price. As the posse dispersed, Jake felt Aiyana's small hand slip into his. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Now they would have to prove that love and determination could overcome prejudice and fear, that a family forged by choice could be stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. The storm clouds were still gathering on the horizon, but for the first time in years, Jake Morrison felt like he had something worth fighting for. 6 months later, Jake stood in the doorway of his rebuilt cabin, watching Aiyana tend to the vegetable garden she'd planted in the spring. The Arizona sun was gentler now in early autumn, painting the desert in warm golds and deep purples. His daughter, for that's what she truly was now, legally and in every other way that mattered, had grown taller and stronger, her face no longer gaunt with hunger and fear. The path to this moment hadn't been easy. Judge Hawthorne had made good on his threat to watch them closely, sending territorial agents to inspect the ranch twice in the first month. But Martha Kellerman had proven to be a powerful ally, using her connections with church groups and women's organizations throughout the territory to advocate for Aiyana's adoption. When a sympathetic judge from Phoenix finally reviewed the case, the legal barriers had crumbled like sandcastles before the tide. "Papa Jake," Aiyana called out, holding up a handful of ripe tomatoes. "Look how well they've grown." Jake smiled, still feeling that familiar warmth whenever she called him father. "Oh, your grandmother would be proud," he said. "You've got her gift with growing things." Aiyana had taught him much about Apache agricultural traditions over the months, blending her grandmother's wisdom with the practical necessities of desert ranching. Their little farm was thriving in ways Jake had never managed alone, and he'd come to realize that survival in this harsh land was better accomplished together than in isolation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both look up, though without the old fear that such sounds had once triggered. Sheriff Bradley rode into the yard, but his expression was relaxed rather than official. "Afternoon, Jake, Aiyana," he called out, dismounting near the corral. "Brought some news from town I thought you'd want to hear." "Good news or bad news, Tom?" Jake asked, though Bradley's demeanor suggested the former. "Depends on your perspective, I suppose," the sheriff replied with a grin. "Got word that Garrett and his bounty hunting outfit got arrested by federal marshals last week. Turns out that investigation Martha mentioned wasn't just bureaucratic nonsense after all. They were collecting bounties on peaceful Apache families, selling scalps from women and children to territorial agents who didn't ask too many questions." Jake felt a grim satisfaction. "What about Hayes? Walter's keeping his mouth shut these days. Lost a lot of standing in the community when word got out about his involvement with illegal bounty hunters. Most folks have come around to thinking you did the right thing, protecting Aiyana." It was true. The tide of public opinion had gradually shifted as more details emerged about the bounty hunters' methods. When Martha organized a school fundraiser, and Aiyana impressed everyone with her intelligence and manners, even some of the harshest critics had begun to reconsider their positions. "There's something else," Bradley continued, his expression growing more serious. "Nightshade wants to meet with you. Sent word through the reservation that he'll be at Devil's Canyon tomorrow at noon. Alone." Jake felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. He'd had no contact with Aiyana's uncle since the dramatic standoff 6 months ago, though he'd occasionally spotted Apache scouts watching the ranch from distant ridges. The surveillance had felt protective rather than threatening, but Jake knew the situation remained delicate. "Did he say what he wants?" Jake asked. "Just that it concerns the girl's future." Aiyana had been listening quietly, but now she stepped forward. "I should go with you, Papa Jake. Uncle Nightshade is my family too." "Absolutely not," Jake replied firmly. "If he wanted to see you, he would have said so. This is between him and me." The next day found Jake riding through the narrow confines of Devil's Canyon, a place where Apache and Mexican forces had once fought a bloody battle decades earlier. The red rock walls rose high on either side, creating shadows that seemed to whisper of old conflicts and older ghosts. Nightshade was waiting in a small clearing where a spring provided the only water for miles around. The Apache war chief sat his horse with the same imposing dignity Jake remembered, but there was something different in his bearing, a weariness that spoke of recent losses. "You came," Nightshade said simply. "You asked," Jake replied, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapons. Nightshade nodded approvingly. "The white man who raises my sister's daughter with honor deserves respect." He dismounted and gestured for Jake to do the same. "Walk with me." They moved to the spring where ancient petroglyphs marked the rock walls, symbols left by peoples who had fought over this land long before either Apache or white settlers arrived. "My band is leaving this territory," Nightshade said without preamble. "The reservation life kills our spirits slowly. We go north, to Canada perhaps, or west to the Sierra Madre. Anywhere the white man's government cannot reach us." Jake felt a complex mix of relief and sadness. "And Aiyana? That is why I called you here." Nightshade turned to face him directly. "In our tradition, when a child is adopted into another tribe, they become fully part of that tribe, but they also carry the blood and spirit of their birth people. Aiyana is Apache, but she is also your daughter now. The question is, what will you teach her of her heritage?" The question caught Jake off guard. He'd been so focused on protecting Aiyana and integrating her into white society that he hadn't given much thought to preserving her Apache identity. I want her to know where she comes from," Jake said slowly, "but I don't know how to teach her things. I don't understand myself." Nightshade reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a bundle wrapped in deer hide. "These belong to my sister, Aiyana's mother. Stories, songs, traditions written in symbols that Aiyana learned as a small child. Also this." He unwrapped a beautiful silver necklace with a turquoise pendant carved in the shape of a butterfly. The butterfly represents transformation, rebirth. It was our grandmother's, then our mother's, then my sister's. Now it belongs to Aiyana. Jake accepted the bundle reverently, understanding the weight of what he was being entrusted with. "I'll make sure she knows where it came from, and I'll help her learn the stories. There is more," Nightshade continued. Martha Kellerman, the teacher woman, she has spoken with people in the territorial capital. They are creating new laws about Apache children in white families. Because of what you have done, other children may find homes instead of government schools. Jake felt a surge of unexpected pride. Martha didn't tell me that. White women often accomplish more than white men realize, Nietzsche observed, with what might have been amusement. She is a good ally to have. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two men from different worlds who had found common ground in their love for the same child. "Will I see you again?" Jake asked. "Perhaps. The winds blow in many directions and the future is hidden from all men. But know this, if harm ever comes to Aiyana, her Apache family will know and we will come." It was the same promise he'd made months ago, but now it felt less like a threat and more like a blessing. Jake had gained not just a daughter, but the protection and respect of her birth people. As Nietzsche rode away into the desert, Jake clutched the precious bundle and thought about the girl waiting for him at home. When he returned to the ranch, he found Aiyana sitting on the porch with a book Martha had given her, practicing her reading. She looked up expectantly as he approached. "Uncle Nietzsche is leaving the territory," he told her gently, "but he wanted you to have these." He handed her the bundle and watched her face light up with wonder as she unwrapped her mother's necklace. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy and remembrance rather than sorrow. "Will you help me remember the stories, Papa Jake?" she asked, fastening the necklace around her throat where it caught the afternoon sunlight. "We'll learn them together," he promised, settling beside her on the porch. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jake Morrison realized that his life had been transformed in ways he never could have imagined. He'd thought he was saving a wounded child, but she had saved him just as surely, from loneliness, from bitterness, from the slow death of a man who had given up on hope. They were an unlikely family, a grizzled Civil War veteran and an Apache girl bound together by circumstance and choice. But they had proven that love could bridge any divide, that family was defined not by blood but by commitment, and that sometimes the most precious things came from the most unexpected places. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the mountains, promising rain for the parched earth. But Jake Morrison was no longer afraid of storms. With his daughter beside him and a future full of possibilities stretching ahead, he was ready for whatever challenges might come. After all, they would face them together, as a family.